Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm Paul Owens, the Orlando Sentinel's opinions editor. Welcome to another in our Florida Forward series of conversations about the future. Before we delve into today's hot topic, a discussion of gambling policies and possibilities, please make sure your cell phones are silent. For this forum, we're going to start with a special addition to our routine. I have the honor and pleasure today of introducing the new publisher and CEO of the Orlando Sentinel, Nancy Meyer. Nancy joined us in November from the Hartford Courant, the largest newspaper in Connecticut, where she was also serving as publisher. Nancy.
And Paul, thank you very much. You know, coming from the largest newspaper in Connecticut, our circulation director tells me this on a regular basis. The state of Connecticut was 5,000 square miles. The Orlando Sentinel's coverage area in Central Florida is 8,000 square miles. So I don't want to diminish my previous job, but truly this is a huge geography that we cover. Today is something that we started back in 2011. Truly, the role of a daily newspaper, whether it's print or online today, hasn't changed. It's to engage and encourage conversation, to have debate, and make sure in these kinds of forums we can sit down, because as a democracy, it's the best ideas that float to the top, and we get to engage in that. That is a privilege of being a free society. And when we started these forums back in 2011, the first one was on space policy, something that is certainly very important to this region. And everything from immigration to educational reform and healthcare reform. Because it's those kinds of topics that are so relevant to this community specifically, but both locally and nationally. And it really does help change and shape what this market, what our economy is built on, and how we pave our way into the future. With that, today's session on gambling, the pros, the cons, what does it look like into the future? I want to thank Paul, I want to thank everybody who's here today. You know, you are part of the conversation. It's relevant. We help continue that conversation and be part of that debate. I welcome our speakers who will be up here momentarily. And again, a great topic and a great conversation that we need to continue from both sides to pave the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. Now, I want to start our conversation with a brief note about terminology. Some folks involved in today's issue prefer to call it gaming. Others call it gambling. I'm going to use the term gambling, but I don't want the audience to infer from that I'm taking a side on the issue based on that choice. Today, I'm the moderator, the umpire in this discussion. Our panelists and audience members who ask questions are, of course, free to use either term, and we'll respect that choice. When it comes to gambling, Florida has a love-hate relationship. In 3 statewide referendums in 1978, 1986, and 1994, Floridians voted against initiatives to legalize casino gambling in the state. Yet Floridians also voted to authorize the state lottery in 1986, and they spend billions of dollars a year on tickets. Pari-mutuel wagering is licensed at several dozen facilities in Florida. Depending on the facility, you can bet on greyhound racing, horse racing, harness horse racing, jai-alai, poker. Did I leave out quarter horse racing? I think that's a new one. Voters in Broward and Miami-Dade counties have authorized slot machines at pari-mutuel facilities in those jurisdictions. And if you think we don't have casino gambling in Florida, you must not visit or live near one of the 8 casinos in our state run by Native American tribes, 7 by the Seminole tribe and 1 by the Miccosukee tribe. The Seminole casinos include the Hard Rock in Tampa, one of the largest casinos in the world. The Seminoles, under a 5-year agreement with the state of Florida, have exclusive rights to offer blackjack at 5 of their 7 casinos in return for annual payments to the state. But that compact expires in July. Governor Rick Scott would have to cut a new deal with the tribe, and the legislature would have to approve it for that arrangement to be extended. If that doesn't happen, Florida won't be able to count on at least $130 million a year from the tribe, and the entire landscape in Florida for gambling could change. That's made gambling policy an especially ripe issue for the legislative session that begins next week. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll cover as much of the ground on gambling as we can with the help of a panel of experts. In the days and months ahead, we'll continue to cover the issue in the Orlando Sentinel, in print and through our digital platform for desktop and mobile devices. Our coverage will be overseen by the Sentinel's editor, Abdo Kahaifa, and associate editor, John Cutter, who are both here today. Once again, we're live streaming today's forum on our website, orlandosentinel.com. Later, we'll be posting video from today's event on our website. If you're watching online or in person and you want to tweet about it, please use the hashtag FloridaForward without a space. You can also tweet questions to us at Orlando Opinion. I'd like to take a moment also before we get started to acknowledge that we have several elected officials here with us today. Thank you in particular for coming. We appreciate your public service. Now I'm going to invite our panelists up to the stage to introduce them. As usual in these forums, I won't be able to go through all of their credentials and accomplishments in my brief introductions. Check out their organization's websites if you want to learn more. They're an impressive bunch. Each panelist will have a couple of minutes to make a few remarks after my introduction, and then we'll get right into the conversation. We'll wrap up by 1:30 so you can get on with the rest of your day. Our first panelist, Jeff Freeman, is President and CEO of the American Gaming Association. That makes him the nation's top advocate for the gaming industry, including both commercial and tribal casinos. In fact, the first tribal casino to join was the Seminole Hard Rock. Before joining the AGA, Jeff was Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of the U.S. Travel Association, the nation's leading advocate for increasing travel to and within the United States. He put together a long list of accomplishments for the travel industry that are especially notable for us here in Orlando with our interest in tourism. He implemented the Travel Promotion Act, a public-private effort that promotes international travel to the United States. He pushed for expansion of the visa waiver program. He defended corporate meetings when they came under attack, and he launched an effort to build an army of 1 million travel employee activists, including many in Florida. Jeff lives in Arlington, Virginia with his wife and 3 children. Today, we're continuing our tradition in these forums of sharing with you something unusual about each of our panelists. Jeff happens to be one of the many proud owners of the Green Bay Packers, and he's a die-hard fan. And this is, I'm told, not just because Aaron Rodgers played football at his alma mater, the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. It's really great to be here in Orlando, and you have no idea how much I mean that. The This morning it was -4 at Washington's Dulles Airport. So I'd like to propose at the outset that we do this debate weekly for the next month or so, if everyone's amenable to that. As Paul mentioned, I've had a long history in the travel industry, not just increasing travel to the United States, but right here in Florida, and spending a lot of time in Central Florida working closely with Visit Orlando, the late Gary Sane, George Agell, who now leads the organization, each of the major parks and attractions in this area. That experience, I think, gave me a good understanding of what makes this area unique, what makes this area special, the family brand that Orlando seeks to promote and protect, all makes good sense. And that's why I'm not here today to tell you that Orlando should have casinos, that Florida should have any more than the 14 casinos of one sort or another that currently exist. Truth be told, I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for a lot of the mistruths and stretch stories that are being sold about the casino industry. The fact is the casino industry supports nearly 2 million jobs in this country, pays about $40 billion in taxes, drives nearly $250 billion in economic activity, and it's making a significant and helpful difference in places like Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Biloxi, and beyond. This is an industry that is a contributor. It's not a savior. It's not a panacea to any one community. We're one part of what should be a multifaceted economic development strategy. You're going to hear a lot today, a lot of claims, I think, that will attempt to counter that. You will hear the story of Atlantic City over and over and over again, as if that somehow relates to what would happen here in Florida, or is happening here in Florida right now. I look forward to talking about each of those stories, but the key is, from my perspective, I look forward to providing the facts. Those of you in this room, those in Central Florida and beyond, you'll make the decision, and you'll make the decision that's right for you. Our focus is on simply providing the facts about the casino industry. Look forward to answering any questions you have, and look forward to working with you as you go down this road.
Thanks, Jeff. Our next panelist, Mark Wilson, is President and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the state's largest business advocacy organization. He leads the political, lobbying, grassroots, and economic research operations of the Chamber, which focuses on creating a business climate that generates prosperity and high-paying jobs, vibrant communities, and global competitiveness in Florida. Mark has taken the lead on several successful statewide political campaigns and numerous legislative and issue campaigns. Mark lives in Tallahassee with his wife, daughter, and 2 sons. And as for something you might not have known about Mark, he's a road racing fan and an amateur driver himself in endurance races. Mark says when you're going 100 miles an hour around a corner, it takes every bit of focus you have. You can't worry about things like elections or amendments to bills, or perhaps public issue forums. Welcome, Mark, and fasten your seatbelt.
Okay. Paul, thank you very much for that introduction, and Nancy and the whole team at the Sentinel, thanks for having this forum. I think that if you reflect on the last few years, this is very much an adult way to have this conversation. And the first few debates that we had, Florida was close to a 12% unemployment rate, and the casinos were coming in from around the world saying, Florida's, you need us, right? We're going to be your economic savior. So I think it's very important to start off with a context of where we are today and how much I appreciate this kind of a forum because, as Jeff said, it's important that the truth comes out, not in a moment of crisis, but at an inflection moment where our economy is the envy of the rest of the world right now, and Florida's education system, our tax climate, our regulatory climate, tourism numbers, almost by every measure you would want to talk about, we're moving in the right direction. So what I would say is this, my top job at the Florida Chamber is to put the long-term interests of our state ahead of any one short-term political interest. And we're a nonpartisan organization that focuses on private sector job creation in the short and long term. And the truth is, Florida is growing by 6 million people. So by 2030, we'll have another 6 million people, residents here. We're approaching 100 million visitors a year. 60 million of them visit Orlando, right? This is the worldwide mecca of places that people want to visit. And if you think about it, most people work 50 weeks a year to spend 2 weeks here in Florida, right? 20 million of us have decided that we want to live here because of our quality of life, our cost of living, our family-friendly, not only image, but our family-friendly policies. And so what I would say is this. At the end of the day, I think Florida's brand is what this is all about. And I agree with my colleague on the left here, Jeff, who talked about we already have a lot of gambling in Florida. In fact, I would suggest to you that any resident or visitor of Florida that's interested in gambling, they don't even have to go a half hour from their home or their hotel. They can do that whenever they want. But the simple truth is this: the casino industry is in big trouble. And we can talk about Atlantic City, we can talk about Vegas, we can talk about Vegas's crime rate, mortgage foreclosure, divorce rate. We can go on and on about what happens. We can talk about the 3 Fortune 500 headquarters they have in Nevada, which are all casinos. Yet here in Florida, we have 16 Fortune 500 headquarters, no casinos. So in other words, here's the bottom line. Florida doesn't need the casino industry. The casino industry is in big trouble, and they need Florida. Think of it this way. Over the last 15 years, so many people have been moving their wealth to Florida. Every minute of every day over the last 15 years, almost $11,000 a minute of wealth has moved to Florida. So the casinos are smart. They want to be here. They want to be where the visitors are coming. They want to be here where we're going. Our unemployment rate is under 6%. We're headed in the right direction. Look very forward to the panel today and really getting to get into some of the meat of the issues. But remember, Florida's brand worldwide is one of the best anywhere. And you've got a $1 billion brand right here in Orlando. I can't imagine why you would want to be part of a state changing its brand and putting everything you worked so hard for on the line. So, Paul, thank you for that introduction.
Thanks, Mark. Our next panelist, Isidore Izzy Havnik, is Vice President of Political Affairs for Magic City Casino, Naples Fort Myers Greyhound Racing and Poker, and Dania Highline. Magic City Casino, formerly known as Flagler Greyhound Track, has been a family-owned business since Izzy's grandfather bought the property in 1952. Izzy was born, raised, and lives in Miami. Izzy has been a strong voice for his company's commitment to invest in the local community, and he's been an active corporate partner with numerous local organizations, including the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce, Miami Beach Cultural Arts Council, and young philanthropists of the University of Miami Sylvester Cancer Center. Izzy is a 2000 University of Miami alumnus. As for Izzy's unusual anecdote, he tells us he has dived with great white sharks before, but he found that experience less stressful than dealing with politicians. I assume today's audience won't be nearly as bloodthirsty. Welcome, Izzy Havnik.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I guess I'm here to be the voice of the voter-approved, taxed, and regulated gambling that is here in Florida. As way of background, my family owns and operates 3 pari-mutuel facilities in Florida, 2 of which have slot machines and poker. My mother is our CEO. She's the 3rd generation of her family to run the business. I guess eventually, since she's taking more time to be a grandma, it'll eventually be my brothers and I will be the 4th generation to take over. I'm here basically to say that for those businesses that are already operating in Florida and have been approved by the voters of the state, we just want to be on a level playing field. We want to be able to compete with the untaxed, unregulated gambling that goes on everywhere in the state of Florida. Hopefully be able to compete on some level with the tribe, the Seminole tribe, and I guess after the last couple of days, the new tribe that's raised their head in Florida, the Porch Creek Band of Indians from Alabama, and eventually if the Miccosukee tribe of Indians ever tries to expand gambling on their reservation. So I'll be short and sweet in my introduction, and I guess wait for the questions.
Thanks, Izzy. Our final panelist, John Sawinski, is president of No Casinos, a statewide organization based in Orlando that campaigns against the expansion of gambling in Florida. No Casinos was founded by former Governor Reuben Askew to oppose the 1978 referendum that would have legalized casino gambling in Florida. No Casinos was reactivated to oppose similar proposals in 1986 and 1994, which were defeated, and a ballot initiative in 2004 allowing slot machines in Dade and Broward counties, which passed. John is a founding partner in Consensus Communications, one of Central Florida's leading public relations firms. He's a veteran of numerous statewide political issue and corporate campaigns. In total, he's led 11 successful statewide campaigns in Florida. And that includes serving as general consultant to the successful Mel Martinez for Senate campaign in 2004. And while John is not quite a dead ringer for Grizzly Adams, he tells me that he, his wife, and 3 boys are avid outdoor enthusiasts. Every summer for the past decade, they've backpacked, biked, and kayaked their way through national parks across America. John, I'm sure you'd rather be fishing at the moment, but we're glad you've joined us. Welcome, John Sawinski.
Great. Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here. And a special thanks to the Orlando Sentinel for hosting this forum. It is very timely here on the precipice of another legislative session where, once again, casino gambling will be a point of discussion that's there. I know Jeff took very understated statements in terms of the discussion of the industry, but that stands in contrast to what happens in Tallahassee when the bell rings and folks begin talking about this issue, because the casino gambling industry is full of a lot of promises about the numbers of jobs and tax revenue that would be generated should their enterprise be broadened and legalized here in Florida. As Mark said, in stark contrast, Florida doesn't need big casinos, but big casinos desperately need Florida. And their industry, too, stands at a very critical crossroads. And here's the state of the casino gambling industry across America. And as we ponder whether or not Florida should stake its future more deeply in this industry, we should consider these facts. The national gambling market is oversaturated. Most Americans live close enough to a casino that they don't have to travel to gamble anymore. That wasn't the case in 1994 when I first led the group No Casinos, when the issue was on the ballot then. But they're no longer a draw for tourists except for Las Vegas because of the fact that so many folks live close to them. From Delaware to Atlantic City to Mississippi, some of the biggest casinos across America have closed or are teetering, leaving taxpayers too often to pick up the tab for lost tax revenues or even directly fund casino bailouts. The operating unit of Caesars Entertainment, America's largest casino company, filed for bankruptcy just last month. Moody's Investor Service recently downgraded the gambling industry outlook to negative, and Fitch Ratings says that casino weaknesses will persist based on saturated markets, stagnant wages for small dollar bettors that used to come through the doors, less interest from millennials and baby boomers who need to prepare more to retire because they lost a lot in the 401ks. Like the Great Depression did for our parents and grandparents, the Great Recession has given people of our time a good dose of austerity, to where the idea of frivolously throwing money around sounds a little bit crazy to a lot of people these days that it didn't a few years back. And so against this backdrop, Florida is one of a few untapped markets for big casino operators in Las Vegas and in Malaysia. And it seems that their best chance to improve quarterly earnings is to tap a vein in America's 3rd largest state. But turning Florida into a casino destination today makes about as much sense as a bank going into the subprime mortgage business today. It just doesn't make any sense. Florida voters have turned down high-stakes casino gambling, Vegas-style casinos, on 3 separate occasions in the past because they recognize it not as an industry that creates jobs and tax revenues, but feeds off of an economy that's already in place. And the social costs of gambling, such as addiction, crime, social dependence, are very high, and have to be borne by society and taxpayers. Finally, sort of the promises that we've heard of revenue, everything from the Florida lottery to the slots amendment down the pike, haven't turned out exactly as promised, not just to Florida voters, but around the country. And I look forward to a further discussion of these.
Thanks, Sean. As usual, I'm going to be rotating questions among our panel members, but I encourage other panelists who have thoughts on the question to speak up afterward, especially if they have a different perspective. We're going to take breaks periodically from my questions for questions from the audience, as well as any possible questions that might be tweeted to us. On the table, on each table, in front of you, you should see some index cards and some pens. Please feel free to write a question for one or more of our panelists and get the attention of our Sentinel, one of our Sentinel employees to collect it. That's Nancy back there who just waved at us. Also, Daryl Owens, a Sentinel columnist and another member of our editorial board who is sitting up here to my left, your right, is stationed at the table at the back of the room. He'll be reviewing questions and picking out a few to ask. He'll also check our Twitter feed. He will get more questions than he can use, and so he'll do the best he can to pick a representative sample. So let's get started. Jeff, I want to pick up on something that John said in his introduction. He used the word saturation. There are almost 900 casinos in the U.S. now in 38 states that allow some kind of casino gambling. So has gambling reached its saturation point in this country?
Thank you, Mark. Paul, I'm sorry. You know, one of the comments you've now heard a couple times is that the gambling industry, I think the word used was desperately needs Florida. I said at the outset, one of the things I'm going to focus on is providing facts. So 2 facts for you to consider. There's only one U.S. gaming company that is invested in expanding gaming in Florida. If the industry were so desperate, you would expect that there would be a lot of other companies trying to open up this market, but indeed that isn't the case. Secondly, leading the American Gaming Association, none of my members have come to me and said, let's focus on Florida, let's open that market, get down there and help us. The discussion hasn't even taken place. So while the rhetoric often sounds good, the facts simply aren't there to back up a lot of these claims that are made. And the claims are based on what's happening elsewhere in the country and interpretations of how the industry is doing elsewhere. There has been a lot of talk about, is the industry saturated in the Northeast, where you used to have casinos only in New Jersey, you now have casinos in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts expanding. So there is a much greater presence of casinos. What we have seen is that where the right public policies are in place and the right product is developed, casinos can thrive. Saturation is an issue that every business faces, whether you're Starbucks, whether you're theme parks, whatever it is, you confront that issue. There are only so many customers for every business. What you have to build is a compelling product. One great example of that is Maryland Live outside Baltimore. You're talking about an area that is plenty of casinos in terms of Maryland, Delaware, the Mid-Atlantic, and elsewhere. And this is now the highest grossing casino in the Northeast, doing extraordinarily well, stepping into what others would consider to be a saturated market. It's doing well because it's a good product. It's targeting its customers. It's providing them with what they're looking for. So I would simply answer the question by saying great products can do great things in the right market.
Mark.
Yeah, Paul, thank you, and Jeff, thanks for that. I think what we have to look at is the fundamental premise of the argument in the first place. If the big commercial casinos in other countries and other states didn't need Florida, the Orlando Sentinel would be having a panel on a very different topic today. Okay? We have pari-mutuels in Florida that have been family businesses and have been creating jobs and paying taxes for decades. We have the Tribe that has been operating casinos here in Florida. The kinds of casinos that are in Vegas and are in Singapore are very different kinds of casinos with very different kinds of games. None of them exist in Florida right now. And so I think we're having an adult conversation here, and I think I don't want to dispute that someone could operate a casino and could make money somewhere in the world. The point is, Florida doesn't need the commercial casinos, the new ones. They need us. If it wasn't true, the fundamental truth is we wouldn't be having this debate today. we'd be having a very different conversation.
John?
And Paul, part of the oversaturation issue is not just where it hops from state to state, but what is the solution when gambling collapses, when enterprise collapse? Oftentimes, the answer that's given is more gambling. I always say casino gambling is the only human endeavor that the solution to having too much of it is to have exponentially more of it. And that's what we see playing out in New Jersey today. In New Jersey, you've had in Atlantic City, 4 of the 12 casinos have gone out of business, including one brand new one, barely operated a year. Chris Christie, I think that the Governor Christie and the legislature have to spend a ton of time, energy, money, intellectual capacity dealing with this issue. But the solution that's coming from New Jersey to collapsing casinos in Atlantic City is more gambling, is sports betting, and even hilariously, more casinos in northern New Jersey to help bail out the casinos that are in Atlantic City. And so that's part of the problem with the industry, is the insatiable appetite for growth that exists both in the number of facilities and in the number of games that exist. We see it here in Florida as well, where the answer that a lot of folks have is that we want more gambling. Izzy and his enterprise, they would love to have more casino-style gambling at their facilities. And so that's the issue we get into in terms of saturation.
Jeff, I want to ask, Izzy, were you going to say something? Okay. Jeff, I want to ask you about Atlantic City because it's what you hear over and over again lately from people who are opposing any sort of expansion of casino gambling anywhere in the country. Why shouldn't that be the argument against it?
Has anyone seen the show Boardwalk Empire? You have a sense of what Atlantic City looked like in the 1920s, long before casinos arrived. Atlantic City is a complex destination. Atlantic City is the second market in the United States to legally have casinos. And they built those casinos, and the market did reasonably well for a number of years, certainly employed a great number of people, provided significant taxes and economic development in that immediate area. Over time, however, as casinos expanded into Philadelphia, into elsewhere in Pennsylvania, into Maryland, and so on, Atlantic City rested on its laurels. If you've been to Atlantic City, you understand that the infrastructure is nothing short of terrible. It is very difficult to get to Atlantic City. From Washington, D.C., I can get to New York City more quickly than I can get to Atlantic City. It speaks to the infrastructure challenges. You see that in terms of buses, in terms of an airport. There isn't even really a functioning airport at this point that is serving the market. And it speaks to the challenge when that market did not recognize the competition it was developing and evolve and defend and promote what it had. Atlantic City is unlike the many other thriving markets that you see with casinos right now. Those markets are happening around the country, in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, and I could go on, throughout West Virginia, in Maryland, looking elsewhere in the country, into Illinois, into Ohio, and Michigan, and elsewhere. Atlantic City really is an anomaly. The story of Atlantic City is one where a market simply did not do what it needed to do to protect itself, to deal with competition. And that's why Atlantic City is where it is today.
But Atlantic City and the demise of Atlantic City that we've seen over the past several months has been nothing short of cataclysmic. I mean, there's been over 10,000 jobs lost. There's been four major casinos closed. But the story of Atlantic City as being a case study on why casino gambling is bad to introduce to an existing economy existed long before the last year or two, or the Great Recession, or the oversaturation of the other states. It goes back to when it was first introduced. It was introduced, it was going to be the panacea. It was going to create revenues and jobs. It was going to save the city from its unemployment problem. It didn't do any of those things. In fact, according to the National Restaurant Association, when casinos came into Atlantic City, 40% of the restaurants went out of business. A third of the retail establishments went out of business. Crime went up. Unemployment actually went up. The population, people voted with their feet. They didn't want to live there. The population went down in the city. And so what we had in Atlantic City, not just recently, but over the course of the entire life cycle of gambling that's been there, has been a really bad story for the industry. And they do like to characterize, well, that's different. That won't happen here. That won't happen where we are. And there are places certainly that have better stories to tell than Atlantic City. But it is an example of how when you introduce casino gambling into an existing economy, how it doesn't bring something to the economy, but rather feeds off of what's already there.
Yeah, John's talking about an existing economy. That's actually one of the great shortcomings of Atlantic City. Atlantic City was not a diversified, and to this day is not a diversified economy. As we promote casinos, we talk about casinos being one aspect of a multifaceted economic development strategy. I can't stress enough. Casinos are not a panacea. They are one entertainment center that a selection of customers enjoy. They're going to come in, they're going to partner with the local community, they're going to do extraordinary things, as I'm sure Izzy's property does, from a philanthropic standpoint, from a job development standpoint, from a continuing education standpoint for its employees. That's what this industry is known to do. Atlantic City is an example of a market that never diversified. And that's why Atlantic City is contradictory to New Orleans and countless other communities around the country. It's interesting that No Casinos frequently focuses on Atlantic City, but yet ignores what's happening in its own backyard. The Seminole property, 90 miles from here. Since that property is open, crime in Hillsborough County has gone down 63%, tourist arrivals has gone up 25%. Runs completely contradictory to Atlantic City. Why are we looking several thousand miles away when we have stories of casino gaming right here in Florida and a very positive story to share?
I want to get Izzy into the conversation. Can you tell us about the economic benefits that your facilities and other pari-mutuels in Florida generate for their communities?
Sure. Well, you have 26 currently there are, I believe, 26 operating pari-mutuels in the state of Florida. You have 8 that are successful, and then you have the rest. And the reason you have 8 that are successful is because we've been allowed to offer other products, such as slot machines. Nobody wants to go to a pari-mutuel anymore. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the pari-mutuels were the big thing in Florida. But nobody wants to go to them anymore. So you have these 8 facilities that have increased employee. We went from 100 employees to over 500 at one of our properties. And everybody else has done that. We've created a bunch of other ancillary businesses that have been successful in our communities. And really, back to the Atlantic City point, nobody wants to go to Atlantic City. Nobody wanted to go to Atlantic City when it had gaming. Nobody wants to go to Atlantic City with or without gaming. People are coming to the communities where there is gaming, and the gaming's just become an added benefit. And it's helped us grow, it's helped other businesses around us grow. We've changed our entire dynamic of the area we sit in, as have the other 8 in South Florida. And that's what at least the pari-mutuel industry in Florida is looking to do now. We want to be able to offer different products at our facilities and be able to compete with the unregulated and untaxed gaming such as the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
Mark.
Yeah, if I could, one more time, I think there's an underlying premise here that gets lost when we look at places like Atlantic City. And that is, I've been doing economic development for 25 years. And many of you are in the economic development industry as well. You can't find a single economic development recommendation anywhere in the United States that recommends bringing in commercial casinos as a way to diversify and expand and improve your economy. So I agree with my counterpart here that casinos are not the panacea. I think in many ways, bringing in commercial casinos are more like a hole in the bottom of a bucket, right? And so what we need to look at is there's not a single report that says this is what you would want to do if you want to build a thriving economy. Number 2, the industry's own reports actually indicate that the places where casinos work are in deserts and in swamps where there's nothing else. Okay, that by the way is the casinos or the industry's own report. In fact, Paul, if I could, just 2 citations. The central gambling study that the industry uses, the National Gaming Study, literally says, and I quote, "It won't work in locations with an already established tourism market like Florida." Okay, the industry doesn't want to share its own research. That's the industry's report. There's another report that UNLV did Remember the tagline in Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? And then remember they tried to make it a family-friendly brand for a while? Remember that? Well, there's a new, relatively new report out about a year old out of Las Vegas, UNLV, that actually talks about how that absolutely didn't work. Put a fork in it. They were wrong. You can't have both. And so whether you want to look at the industry's own reports that say it won't work in a place like Florida, or look at the industry's own report that says you can't have both. And I'm telling you, you have a $1 billion brand here in Orlando. We don't want places like Brazil and Canada and a lot of our partners around the world to have advertising that says, come to Florida where we have the largest casino in the world. That's just not good for our brand. It's too much to risk.
But to counter that, we do have the largest casinos in the world in Florida. The Seminole Tribe is the largest casino in the world, right there in Tampa. And there's a reason that the Seminole Tribe wants to protect their monopoly over a huge industry that has provided them billions and billions and billions of dollars in the state of Florida, because gambling has worked here. And if anyone can prove it, it's just go look at the tribe. Just drive down I-4, come down to South Florida where they have three, to Broward County where they have 3 operating facilities. Look at what they want to build in the middle of the right outside the Everglades in Immokalee, Florida. Gambling works in Florida because you have people coming here who want an added activity. Central Florida, I think most people would agree, nobody's trying to open a casino anywhere near Orlando. They want to open in the coastal cities, and the Seminole Tribe has proved that it will work here in Florida.
Let me pivot off of that. In terms of what the Seminole Tribe has proven is that if you own a casino, you can make money. And I know that's what's been proven in the pari-mutuel facilities that have slot machines as well, that if you were the owner of the license, then naturally you'd be all for it and it's a good thing. I'd encourage everybody to do something. If they want to know what the impact of the Seminole casinos have been, pull up Google Maps tonight. Look at it. Look and see what's around Seminole facilities that have been there for years. Nothing. It's pretty much an economic wasteland. You go around the Seminole Casino in Tampa, and you will find on one corner a pawn shop, another a gas station, another a pizza shop, and it's miles before you find anything in any direction that resembles any kind of pedestrian sort of commerce that goes on. If that were such a generator and such a magnet for commerce that was so beneficial to the community, then the best and highest use of the land surrounding the Seminole Casino would be other things that cater to folks who go there. Unlike, by the way, do the same Google Maps of Orlando and pick any of the major tourist destinations that are here and see what's happened around them. They've been a magnet for other sorts of commerce that's gone on. Do that also with the Hollywood, because I'll tell you what, I did a forum like this at the Seminole Hard Rock down in Hollywood, and it's a really nice facility. If you were fortunate enough to own it or one of the facilities within it, you would be all for it. But drive around it and it's nothing but, sort of packaged stores and frankly blighted area. If it were such a great thing, then Immokalee would no longer be Immokalee. And so, I think it's fair game to look at the Seminoles and what it's done. And yes, you can run a successful casino if you own it. But the idea that we as Floridians somehow benefit from it, or that it's going to bring down crime. A third of the gamblers who call Florida Council for Compulsive Gambling Hotline admit to committing crimes to support their habits. That's why the Sheriff's Association is opposed to the expansion of casino gambling in Florida. I'm glad Sheriff Demings is here as well, is very active with our organization and on this issue. And so, by all means, I'm more than welcome to talk about the tribe and what casinos do and don't do for the rest of Florida.
There are 2 things about that. One is, if you look around the 8 commercial casino pari-mutuels in South Florida, crime has dropped around every one of those facilities. And these are in densely urban areas. 2 is the reason the tribal casinos have blighted areas around them is because it's the Seminole Tribe. They're on tribal land. They're not in major metropolitan areas. They're on the reservations. If you move those to communities where you already had developments around them, it would work and they would coexist together well.
But in Tampa, they abut a lot of other non-tribal land that's there. Tampa's a bit of an outlier and a good example of this. And again, saying that crime is down in the zip code of a casino is like saying that there's no greater incidences of lung cancer in the zip code of a cigarette factory. The types of crime that gambling begets are the types of problems that people bring home with them. And if you look again at the Center for Compulsive Gambling, it starts with stealing from work or family members to writing bad checks to the other things. But addiction, which nobody wants to talk about when they talk about this issue, breeds crime and social dependency that all of us as a society and as taxpayers have to pay for.
So I have a follow-up question for you, John. Given what you said, would you advocate cracking down on current gambling in Florida, closing pari-mutuels, shutting down the state lottery, doing other things to limit or eliminate gambling?
Here's what I think are very important things that we need to do. First and foremost, we need to close loopholes. There's an entire industry of lobbyists and lawyers whose job is to find loopholes in pari-mutuel law so that they can get a license to race horses. They have barrel racing, betting on barrel racing in North Florida. Nothing that was envisioned under the statute, but the real reason they wanted is to have poker rooms. So we can start by closing loopholes that exist. We've got a bill that closes loopholes and does that. Here's the thing that's most insidious, though, is that in Tallahassee, the good reform bills, the things that everybody would agree, yeah, we could do this to close a loophole and prevent abuse and everything else, is held hostage by the advocates of the big casinos because they want to pack that into their bill so they can have their giant casinos and be able to say, yeah, but we eliminated all that bad stuff. So therefore, there's not really more gambling going on in Florida. We've just got the good kind that's all dressed up, and we've gotten rid of some of the others. So we're for closing the loopholes that exist. In terms of the lottery, the voters approved the Florida lottery, but I'll tell you this, Paul, I think that voters had in mind a once-a-week drawing before the 11 o'clock news when they approved it. They didn't imagine it as every night of the week there's a drawing and every day of the week. This just goes to how there's expansion of gambling in Florida. And the only way you can stop it is to say, we're not going to have any more of it. And just a quick digression is, years ago, Izzy's family and several other dozen pari-mutuel operators existed. And they raced dogs and horses and had highlight. And that all worked, and that was fine and good, and communities invited them by local votes. There wasn't high-stakes gambling of any sort. For years, big casino operators tried to come into Florida, and Floridians closed them down. But what ended up happening were a few things. Number one, there were for years it was even illegal if we want to have a few beers at home and play poker against each other, that would be illegal in the state. Penny ante poker was illegal. And for years, the legislature would never even pass a bill to decriminalize home poker games. Until one day, sheriff's deputies busted down the doors of a retirement center in Pinellas County and arrested 8 old guys who were playing poker. They became known as the Largo 8, okay? But to free the Largo 8, the legislature legalized penny ante poker. What they didn't know was at the same time, Congress was passing the Federal Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which basically says that if a form of gambling is illegal in a state for anyone to participate in, that the tribes are allowed to have it, and they're allowed to have electronic versions of those games. So because of the Largo 8, the Seminoles and Miccosukkees got poker rooms. Well, the pari-mutuels said, we need a level playing field, give us poker rooms. The legislature gave in, and in 1996 gave them poker rooms, because nobody wants to watch dogs race anymore, let's be honest. And so they gave them poker rooms. The next thing that happens, by the way, because of the scratch-off games of the lottery, the tribes get electronic pull tab machines, which look like slot machines that are there. And they say they can't compete. The next thing that happens, voters are told in 2004 that if they approve a constitutional amendment, there will only be slot machines in 7 pari-mutuel facilities in Dade and Broward counties. Voters took that bet by a 50.8% margin, 0.8%, approved the slot machines. They got not only those 7, but an 8th pari-mutuel who won a court case, and the tribes, because they had to have them at their 7 facilities all over the state. And that begets the whole conversation all over again with the Vegas guys coming in saying, hey, look, you got all this, what's a little bit more? And so you can't control gambling unless you simply say, we're going to draw the line and stop, and where possible, roll it back.
Jeff, I want to ask you, what do national surveys, or if available, surveys in Florida, tell us about public attitudes toward gambling, whether or not government should be making gambling illegal?
There are two interesting points that stand out, one from surveys and one from on-the-ground experience. Today, 87% of Americans say gambling is acceptable for them, their friends, or others. That has gone up considerably in recent years. Society has changed. This isn't the same society we had 10, 20, 40 years ago, and Americans' comfort with casino-style gaming is far greater than it has ever been before, and there's only reason to believe that will continue to grow as we see a more progressive populace that is comfortable with these things. The other thing that jumps out, and this is what runs a little bit contradictory to the critics of casino gaming, is that when you go into the communities where casino gaming exists, the greatest champions are often the mayors, the police chiefs with whom they're working closely, the city managers, and many others who are part of these experiences, they're part of the partnerships, they're seeing the benefits firsthand. So one of the great ironies is that the casino critics are often loudest in those communities where casinos don't exist. If you listen to the critics, you would think the sky is suddenly going to fall if there are casinos there and adults are able to make adult decisions and figure out how they want to go enjoy themselves on a given night. The facts simply run counter to all of the claims. Mark raises a very good point. You have a strong economy right now, a recovering economy in Florida. You have a strong brand in Central Florida. Very different brand than South Florida, a different brand than the Panhandle or elsewhere. You have to make the decision that's right for you. Are casinos going to somehow take the economy of Central Florida and make it exponentially greater? No. Are they going to make it better? They certainly will. Are they going to, so all the claims that the sky will fall simply runs counter to the facts that are out there.
I want to give Daryl a chance to get to some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience or online.
Okay. The first question is directed to Mr. Freeman. It says, Florida has said no 3 times. Why is the gambling industry continuing to push this issue? Does the industry know better than the voters of Florida what's best for Florida?
Yeah, there's a slight difference between the industry, between individual companies. This is true in every industry. There are several companies here that are encouraging expansion. There are other companies here that are discouraging expansion. So you have me from the industry sitting here telling you, I'm not encouraging you to adopt casinos. You make the decision that's right for you, but do it based on the facts, not on claims that somehow you're going to turn into Atlantic City and you're all going to speak with an accent. It simply doesn't follow logic.
Okay, the next question is directed to Mr. Wilson. It says, I thought the Florida Chamber supported free enterprise. Whatever happened to the free market?
Right, well, thank you very much for that question. It's actually the single favorite question I get on this topic because the asker of the question, I'd like to talk more about what free enterprise actually means. And the issue is this, there's a free market out there and it's not working. When you look at Las Vegas and the crime statistics, when you look at mortgage foreclosures, when you look at where casinos are not working, when you look at the industry's own report that says it will not work in an established economy like Florida.
Can I get a comment?
Of course you can. It's your industry. Your industry paid for it, so your lobbyists and folks obviously are letting you down. The point is this: we don't need this here. Okay, the casinos need us, and so my top job as Florida's champion of free enterprise is to make sure we have regulations and laws and taxes and an education system that protect Florida's future and give people an opportunity to prosper, an opportunity to have a high quality of life. What the industry has already acknowledged is that this is a bad idea for a state like Florida. And I think when you look at the facts that way, the very best way to help small businesses thrive, remember, 4 out of 5 jobs in Florida come from small businesses. And we already know that casinos kill small business jobs. We already know that, okay? So the bottom line is the best way to champion free markets, the best way to champion free enterprise is in fact to set up a system where everybody can thrive. And what you don't want to do is put a giant vacuum in the middle of an otherwise thriving economy. That, in fact, would sound more like crony capitalism, where you're taking things out of an economy. Free enterprise advocates understand that is a bad idea when you're trying to grow and trying to have an economy diversified.
Let me also say that free enterprise is the furthest thing from what the gambling industry advocates in Tallahassee. The tribe wants an exclusive arrangement with the state where they're the only purveyors of the games. Izzy's industry, they would like to be the only, but they would not like one of us to open a competing enterprise next door to them. They've got a license that they've owned for years, and they advocate very hard for more casino gambling under that license, but not to broaden it up to free enterprise and competition. One of the major Las Vegas casino companies advocates one license because they feel like they've got a leg up that they could win that license. Another one would like to see 3 licenses for now, because they're not sure that they could be number 1, but probably in the top 3. These are not free market discussions that are going on related to this industry, because it doesn't operate in a free market. It operates in a highly regulated environment for good reason, and we could talk for another hour and a half about those reasons.
Real quick, we have no problem if anyone else comes into our market. Mind you, we don't think there should be a casino on every corner of Miami, but we have no problem if anyone comes into our market. What we're asking for is really free market, a free market economy. We want to have the same products, the same tax rate, the same regulation as the other people who conduct the exact same business as us. That's all the pari-mutuel industry in Florida has ever asked for. You have so many different kinds of gambling in Florida, and everyone has different rules and different tax rates and different regulations. We don't care who's here as long as we all get to compete the same way.
But y'all litigated against Hialeah being able to have slot machines at the same time.
For the same reason that you said,
Sure.
because we ran a campaign that said 7 pari-mutuel facilities. We didn't ever in our life think the legislature of the state of Florida would allow an 8th to open without the vote, without the will of the people. But everywhere we have advocated has been approved by the voters.
Yeah, two comments on what Mark said. One is about small business and this claim that small businesses will somehow suffer when casinos are present. Again, it runs counter to the facts. It runs counter to the facts in Columbus, Ohio, in Detroit, in New Orleans, and beyond, where these small businesses become the suppliers of the casino. They become beneficiaries in terms of the spending that takes place outside the casino. Earlier this year, when we talked about just direct spending from casinos, we talked about the $300 million that casinos generated. We then put out a figure later that was $1.2 billion, and no casinos raised questions. Why didn't we change our numbers? Because we started counting what it was that the patrons, the employees and the casino were spending elsewhere in the community. So there are those beneficiaries. New Orleans is actually a really good example of an area that was concerned about what effect would it have a land-based casino. And they brought in a Harrah's casino, the only one in New Orleans, and a strong restaurant community, a strong lodging community, very concerned. Said, we do not want that casino to have any real restaurants that can have a buffet, and we don't want any type of lodging. We want to prevent that because we want to protect what we have. And it was only a matter of about 5 years before the restaurateurs, the hoteliers, and everyone else came together and said, not only do we want them to have that, we want to partner more closely with them, because what's good for the casino is good for Bourbon Street, it's good for the rest of New Orleans. And now you've seen the other small businesses, the other retailers in the area come around, encourage restaurants, encourage hotels. So that's one part about the small business. The second point would be, already here, not counting Seminoles, just counting the commercial casinos here in Florida, you're supporting 7,500 jobs, nearly $400 million in taxes, $1.2 billion in economic impact. The casino industry is a strong and active member in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's driving excellent commerce right here in Florida. So you can't help but wonder if there's something deeper to this. When a state chamber comes out against business, to the question that's been asked, is there something deeper? Are we concerned about casinos? Or are we concerned about competition, perhaps, on the meetings and convention side? What is it that's driving this? Because certainly the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, chambers around the country have embraced the role the casinos are playing.
Let me venture to answer that question. No Casinos was started in 1978, as Paul mentioned, by Governor Reuben Askew. And Florida was the first place where the casino industry looked, and it's why we draw so many parallels to Atlantic City. And if you look at when the casino industry really makes its biggest play for legalization, it's when the economy is in its darkest days. And we were coming out of the oil crisis in the late 70s, and New Jersey voters approved casinos for Atlantic City. The very next place they came was Florida. And it did not agree with Governor Askew's sensibilities about casinos fitting into Florida's sense of place, brand for tourism, character of our communities or quality of life. And he really brought together and coalesced the business community in Florida into a coalition that frankly has existed throughout the years. It's a great frustration of the casino industry because most states do just kind of roll over and buy the line. And so back in 1978, Reuben Askew chartered a 727 and brought business leaders to Atlantic City to see what was going on. And they didn't like what they saw. And a lot of the involvement of the business community, it's not just the chamber, it's the Florida Attractions Association, the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, the Retail Federation, faith and family organizations across the state, the Florida Sheriff's Association, as I mentioned earlier, and leaders that we have of both parties, from Bob Graham to Jeb Bush, who believe that this is not an industry whose operations are compatible with the economy or the social fabric of Florida. And that's why our business leadership has stood up opposed to it, is because Florida, unlike the other places, Mississippi, we're not Bangor, Maine. We have a brand, a multi-billion-dollar brand, not just in Orlando, but statewide, that's staked in family-friendly tourism. We've got a quality of life that's enviable. As Adam Putnam, another one of our supporters, like to say to the rest of the country, Florida is a reward for a life well lived. That's why they come here. And they don't come here to say that the National Association of Realtors shows second to landfills, casinos being what people would least like to live next to. Okay? And so when you start looking at it like that, and it's great to talk about ethereally, when people say, well, how about one in your backyard? They're like, well, no thanks. So that's the answer to the question.
Okay, Mark, I want you to address one thing that Jeff raised, though, and I've heard it from others, and that is that opposition to casinos in Florida is really driven by powerful players in the tourist industry that don't want to let rivals into the market. So the question is this an anti-competitive position on the part of the chamber?
Sure, I think it's a fair question. So Florida Chamber's had this position since the early 90s, right? Before it was, cool to have positions on this. And so I think that Florida absolutely has a brand. And if you think about it, take agriculture, for example. Agriculture, construction, and tourism have been the staple of Florida's economy for 30 years. But here's the truth. It's not enough anymore, right? We not only need to support our agriculture industry, our tourism industry, our growth, but look what we're doing. We're diversifying. Look at UCF. Look at the STEM jobs. Look at bioscience. Look at life science. Look at what we're doing in health. Look what Florida's doing with Scripps and Torrey Pines. Look at the semiconductor business. Look what's happening here with simulation in Orlando, right? I mean, this is real. This is exactly the kind of economy back in when the Florida Chamber started Enterprise Florida in the mid-90s. The whole goal over the next couple of decades was to diversify this economy so that it could be the example for the rest of the country. So are there going to be winners and losers? There's always winners and losers. We want the consumer to win every time. But I will tell you, there's a reason almost every other state in the United States is looking at Florida. We have the #1 fourth grade reading scores in the United States, #2 in the world, right? Look at, we've cut taxes 40 times in 4 years. We've eliminated 3,000 regulations in 4 years, right? We're going to add 280,000 residents this year. That's over 800 a day. We're going to add 250,000 net new jobs to Florida this year. right? So we can call this whatever we want, but at the end of the day, the outside Florida commercial casinos, they need what we have. There's not one thing in Florida that says we need what they have. And so, Paul, I really needed to address the prior point if I can. So it's ironic to me that an advocate for gambling expansion would try to use New Orleans as an example that we should follow here in Florida. I can't think of anything that they're doing in New Orleans with their education system, with their taxes, with what's happening in diversifying the economy. Let's use New Orleans all day long. It's a great place to compare Florida to because we win.
The governor went to jail during the permitting process for
Okay.
casinos.
So-
17 people were arrested in an FBI sting operation for profit skimming from poker machines. That's the track record in New Orleans. I'd happily mine that all day.
Right.
But you have a current governor, Bobby Jindal, who is considered one of the party's shining lights right now.
So, but back on the points that were made, I think there are a lot of groups out there, and some of them are for sale. You talked about groups that might advocate, okay? Let me be clear. I fully support Izzy and his peers. They've been in Florida for decades, creating jobs, trying to do this the right way, okay? The compact that could be extended, that was originally designed as a way to limit the expansion of gambling, and it's working, okay? We're for the appropriate, responsible way to grow this. None of what the casinos want to talk about is they want new types of games. When we talk about building the largest casinos in the world, one of the casino advocates in one of the floors in Miami advocated that their floor would be so big that the top 5 casinos in Vegas would fit in one floor and room for a super Walmart to spare. Okay, that's just one of the casinos that they're advocating for. Here's the point. They've met with me. They've handed me a check. They tried to get the chamber to take their position. I handed them their money back, okay? We're talking about a lot of money because our position at the Florida Chamber is not for sale. Securing Florida's future is worth fighting for. There's not one thing we need here in Florida. And Paul, my last point would be this. We don't even need to look to the casino industry to figure out what happens when you bring something to town and how bad it is for small business. Everybody in here knows Florida hosted the Republican National Convention just down the road in I-4 in Tampa. Ask the small businesses around the convention center how excited they were that the convention was coming to town. They staffed up, they added extra shifts. You know what happened? Nothing. Those small businesses suffered the entire time the convention was there because you know what happened? The convention had all the food inside. The convention had all the services inside. All those small businesses within walking distance, it was the worst days of the year for them. So we don't even have to look at casinos to know what happens when you bring a big vacuum into a marketplace where we already have a thriving small business economy.
I want another opportunity for Daryl to ask some questions.
All right, this one comes from our Twitter feed. It says, if it's true casinos provide new jobs in a given area, are there statistics that show an average of how many jobs are destroyed? And I guess that the way he wrote that, it probably should have said how many jobs are created.
Or destroyed. John, there is a tendency in these debates to argue through anecdote. So I'm wondering, based on that question, is there are there empirical studies that show that gambling is a net loser when it enters the community, for the community?
Let me start with this, Paul, and that's the fact that there's an amazing dearth of studies that aren't done by the industry. I mean, the industry has bought and paid for most of the studies that are out there about the industry. I will say this, though. The legislature hired a firm that's often used by the industry. We were very skeptical when they hired Spectrum Gaming to do the study on Florida because Spectrum Gaming consults for all the major casino companies across America and around the world. But what came out of their study was a much more sober assessment than we had predicted, frankly. And one of the things that it looked at was the percentage of patronage for if you had destination resort casinos in Southeast Florida, which is what the Vegas and international industry wants. What percentage of that would be tourists versus residents? Over 90% of the patrons would be residents. It was over 95% when you included seasonal residents, our snowbirds. And so this is, when you look at statistics like those, social costs, as studied by Earl Grinnells in his, also cannibalization that's in the study. Mark alluded to it, but it's actually on Jeff's organization's website. I shouldn't cite it, they'll take it down, and doggone it, I like using it. But that they acknowledge that cannibalization, while they dismiss it in other parts of the country, that it could be a very real threat for Florida and other developed tourism economies. And so what we see, we don't have to look at studies, we can actually look at case studies of communities where this has happened, is that money spent in a casino is money not spent at a movie theater, at a restaurant, in a hotel, in another part of the economy. It's not new money that's brought, it's simply rearranging the deck chairs that are there. And unfortunately, it's done in a very predatory way. That's why the Hotel and Restaurant Association is on our side of this issue, because casinos deeply discount or give away, as loss leaders, food and hotel rooms in order for people to stay there. That's not competition, that's a predatory business practice. And so existing hotels and restaurants lose, casinos win at the end of the day. And you could say, hey, that's great, that's a free market, but don't pretend that that's creating jobs, commerce, or revenue, because it's directly offset by spending that's lost in some other sector of the economy. When you look at the spectrum statistic, that over 90% of the patrons would be our in Izzy's facility and the tribal facilities. Again, after you do your Google Maps, get in your car, drive through their parking garage. I'll pay you for every non-Florida plate you find, or any car that's new enough to be a rental car. They're locals that are spending their money there, not folks who are traveling to be there.
And just one comment on that. I think anyone who has been to Las Vegas in recent years has seen what the future of the gaming industry is in many respects. You see the shifting, right? In any service industry like this, entertainment industry, you have to constantly be evolving and providing the customer with what they want. And one of the things you see right now in Las Vegas that runs counter to one of the points John just made is that more than 2/3 of the revenue right now in Las Vegas is non-gaming. It's restaurants, it's shows, it's clubs. We're not giving those things away. There's a customer interest in attractions that didn't before exist, and that's where the money is being spent. That is the front end of how this industry is evolving, continuing to provide the customer with new products. So I think that the idea that it's somehow, Mark's made the point a couple of times, the vacuum point. It's an interesting point, but it just simply hasn't been borne out in a place like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where the casinos came in as steel mills were closing. There was grand opposition from small businesses and others to the casino's arrival. And now they're partnering with the casinos, small businesses locally, to continue to see them thrive. They're seeing that benefit. I go on and on to other communities where the same is happening. There's, again, when you bring in a new entity like casinos, if you were to do that here in Central Florida or elsewhere, it is competitive. It's certainly going to take the challenge up for other businesses to compete for customers. That will certainly happen. But as Mark said, there are winners and losers in everything you do. What we know about our industry and the best of our industry, it brings in a compelling product that customers are looking to enjoy.
Izzy, I wanted to ask you whether or not the pari-mutuels have a strong feeling one way or the other on allowing destination resort casinos in South Florida.
I think, well, I don't want to speak for everybody else. We have not, our company hasn't taken a position one way or another on destination casinos. All we continue to say is, if somebody comes in, we want to play by the same rules that they have to play by, and that's all we will continue to say. What the legislature decides to do with gaming, just like they did with Hialeah Racecourse, which we were the only people who tried to stop and prevent the legislature from thwarting the will of the voters. Nobody stood there with us. Is whatever the voters decide and whatever the people of Florida want, let them have. But but let everybody compete the same way.
Okay. Daryl, I'm going to give you an opportunity to get another question or two in.
Okay, this one is directed to the anti-gaming critics, to the gaming critics rather. Do you have any objections to existing pari-mutuel operators being taxed as the tribes are? And if so, why?
Well, when you look at the existing pari-mutuel operators, there's really two sets of them. There are, and I'll just characterize it this way, the haves and the have-nots. Izzy's Enterprise and the others that are in Dade and Broward County that have slot machines are the haves. The others are the have-nots. If you look at the tax rate that's paid by the have-nots, the tax rate, and by the way, and this is the life cycle of gambling. They say, invite us to your community so that you can tax us and regulate us. And the part of me that used to work at a Chamber of Commerce looked at that and says, well, that doesn't make any sense. No business holds itself up as a target for taxation and regulation. And so what happens is they gain clout, influence, other things. They lobby for lower tax rates. Today on live pari-mutuel racing, in live pari-mutuel events, the tax rate is nil. It's close to the regular state sales tax rate or less. I think that industries ought to be required to abide by their promises. When the slot machine amendment passed in 2004 by 0.8%, the promise was made to Florida voters that that would generate $500 million a year for our schools. Familiar tone. We heard the same thing with the lottery. $500 million a year for our schools. It's never generated more than 160, 170 million dollars that are there in a year. And their tax rate recently went from 50% to 35%. What the have pari-mutuels have typically argued for in Tallahassee as it relates to destination resorts is we want what they get in regard to the number of games and the types of games they have. We want what they get in terms of the tax rate. The tax rate that the destination casino resorts have advocated is 10%, something that would be probably among the lowest in America in terms of gambling tax rate established for it. So in answer to the question as it relates to would we be for or against them having the same rate, we're for the industry standing by its promises. And what we have seen, if you drop their rate to 10%, they would probably generate 80 million on slots or something like that. And that would be a far departure from what voters have been promised over the years.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm sorry, Izzy, go ahead. Okay, sure. I think from a free enterprise standpoint, in a perfect world, you want the same rules and the same rates to apply across the board and let people compete, right? Best product wins and let the consumer win. I think the challenge is that we're not facing that kind of a question, right? What we're facing is international and out-of-state commercial casinos want to come in and introduce new games that don't currently exist in Florida. And they want to be able to advertise in Brazil, Canada, and other countries where a lot of our visitors come from. Come to Florida where you can gamble. And folks, I've been to Brazil a couple of times. I've been to Singapore. We do a lot of trade missions. And I'm telling you right now, they love Florida because of our brand. Nobody's there advertising about our big casinos that we have, and we need to keep it that way.
One quick thing. When people keep talking about the promises that were made in the 2004 election, the part missing is we made the promises assuming we would be able to operate in a business environment that allowed us to grow our business and run our businesses. We did say at a 25% tax rate, but we also assumed that we would be able to do things like be open 24 hours a day. We're not allowed to be. We thought we would be able to have some of the benefits that people have grown accustomed to in Vegas or at the Seminole Tribe, be it giving away things, which we're not allowed to do, or stuff like that. Our business was set up to fail at the time, and you said Governor Bush was very against us. I remember debating you, Paul, many times on this issue. Our business was set up to fail. We are the highest taxed business in the state of Florida. Our state tax rate is 35%, but that doesn't count all the other taxes we have to pay. We're taxed at, The lowest tax rate on a pari-mutuel with slots is 42%, the highest one is 54%. Businesses can't grow in an environment like that, which is why all of our promises that we made, if we were allowed to operate in a proper business model for this type of business, we would be able to achieve, but the state has continued to hamper our ability to run our businesses the way we envisioned when we made those promises.
We're approaching the end of the program, so I want to have kind of a lightning round for a final couple of questions and want to ask each of the panelists these questions. And the first question is, if you had a wish list, what would be the one or two things that you would like to see the Florida legislature, which convenes for 60 days next week, what would you like to see them do in 2015? Start with Jeff.
Again, I mean, I'm a broken record on this. The Florida legislature should make the best decision for Florida. I just simply hope that the facts are heard. I hope there's an opportunity to have an open debate like this. I think, as Mark said at the outset, this is the way to do this. Have a discussion, let people make a decision in an informed way. So I hope that's the discussion in Tallahassee. I hope that's a discussion elsewhere where we can get rid of some of the mistruths and some of the scorched earth approach here and simply base a decision on the facts.
Okay, Mark.
Sure, thank you. I think that the first thing I wish the legislature would do is say to the out-of-state and international, multinational commercial casinos, not now, not ever. And so we can take that whole conversation off the table and go back to talking to Florida businesses that have been creating jobs for generations and have a conversation about extending the compact, right, as a way to limit the expansion of gambling. And also talk with pari-mutuels about what's the best way to grow jobs, what's the best way to do this responsibly, and have a Florida conversation among Floridians and Florida employers about what's the best way, the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. It's ironic, Paul, that what we're having here, because of the millions of dollars that are being spent by foreign companies and companies outside of Florida who want in on what we have, their argument is we need to expand gambling in order to regulate it, in order to make it fair. And the reality of it is that's folly. What we need to do is say, look, we don't need the big commercial out-of-state casinos, period. Not now, not ever. What we want is a what's best for Florida conversation, and that means extending the compact with, if the terms can be improved for both sides, so be it. And then talk to the pari-mutuels about how do we help them grow as well. That's what I wish the legislature would do.
Izzy.
We don't have enough time for what I'd want, but quickly it would be for the tracks inside Dade-and-Broward to be allowed to compete with the other gaming interests that are currently operating in Dade-and-Broward. For the tracks outside Dade-and-Broward, it would be to allow us to have products that voters have overwhelmingly voted for in those communities. I think as an industry, we would all love for the state to finally do something about the illegal gambling that goes on everywhere in the state of Florida, be it the gray market machines, the internet cafes, or whatever that were supposedly shut down 2 years ago, but nobody really has the authority to go in and shut down. And also, I wish it would be done in the first week of session because I really don't enjoy going to Tallahassee.
I'll say ditto to Izzy's last statement. Our wish list, no expansion. As Izzy says, close the loopholes and end the abuses that folks are using this cottage industry of lawyers and lobbyists that would exploit our existing laws to try and do things that are outside the law. Have just a clean discussion of those issues, not tied up with other things, and get that passed. And then finally, let's move on. We've had this discussion for 4 years now, and we think the legislature has wisely turned it down for 3 years. Let's move on to other things. There are very few issues that matter, that are of less importance to the long-term consequences of Florida that get put to the back burner when issues like this are on the front. And if you would imagine for a moment, if you could harness the time, the energy, the political capital, and the intellectual capacity that's been devoted by the legislature to gambling for the last 4 years and devoted to fill in the blank, fixing our schools, our roads, our public safety, we as a state would be so much further ahead, and of course, growing our economy in a diverse way.
Izzy raised the issue of internet sweepstakes cafes. I think you echoed it, John. I think that's a great opportunity for the four of us to work together. I think it's something we should do. I think we're in lockstep agreement on some of those loopholes that are there, some of the people that want to make a buck without any of the regulations that follow. And I'd encourage us all to get together and work on that.
Okay, and the last question is, and you can put on your fortune teller's hats for this. What do you expect, and this time we'll start with John and come this way, what do you expect the legislature to do during this session?
Gosh, that's a hard one. My sense is that the legislature, we like our chances this year, like in the past 3 years, to see no expansion. So I think I would start there with that. I think the big question is what happens with the Seminole Compact. And there are three things that could happen with that. It could either be renewed as it is. It could not be renewed, and table games, bank table games, go away from tribal facilities. Or it could be used as an excuse to try and expand gambling either at the tribal facilities or off, and we're going to fight like heck to make sure number 3 doesn't happen.
Is it?
What do I expect to happen? I expect to be sitting here or in other places in the state having the same conversation again next year, and the year after, and the year after. The joke in my house is my kid's 1. By the time he graduates college, I would like to not be having this conversation anymore. So cautiously optimistic that the legislature will do something, but as both people on both sides of me have said, we've had this conversation for 4 years, and I don't see it ending anytime soon.
Mark?
Yeah, it's interesting, you talked about a magic wand and what do we predict. What I'd like to have happen, we've already covered. What I think the ingredients are here for is a special session on this issue. And I know that's not a popular thing to talk about or say, but it's not only because of the expansion of gambling conversation, it's because of other issues that are out there. We have, on healthcare, we have a $2 billion low-income pool issue that the feds have said they're not going to continue. And that has to do with taking care of people in our communities who can't afford the coverage or the care when they go to a hospital. And then when you add on the extension of the compact, which we think makes a lot of sense, neither one of these are required to happen by the end of the legislative session. And so we could end up, the ingredients are there for us to get important work done during the legislative session. And with it not being an election year, I could in fact envision spending the summer in Tallahassee trying to iron out some of these very big, complex issues. I agree with Izzy. I hope they'll deal with this in the first week of session. But there are hundreds of lobbyists and advocacy groups on all 40 sides of this issue. And I think that the ingredients are there for it because of other factors, Paul, to not be resolved. This isn't an issue that you can just look at by itself. It has lots of other tentacles that may spill over into the budget. You have Amendment 1 to contend with, which is another issue. I don't know, I think the ingredients are there for this to not be resolved soon.
You've got 3 good experts here, 3 local folks who know far better than I what to expect, so I would encourage you to follow their advice and counsel. I think the one thing that shifts this debate perhaps in the future is greater engagement from outside of Tallahassee. The general public talking about why they're interested in a different playing experience, why they're not interested in casinos. But I certainly hope this is something that the general populace has much more say in, an opportunity to contribute to that discussion. I think we'd all find that much more healthy and informative.
Right, well, we're bumping up against our 1:30 deadline when we promised you would be free to get on with the rest of your day. I'd like to say a special thank you to each of our panel members, particularly Jeff, who came down from Washington for this event. We'd like to thank today's audience for joining us. We appreciate your attention and your questions. Thanks to those of you who have been watching online. We hope today's event was enlightening. You can look forward to learning more about these issues as the Sentinel continues our coverage. And I will conclude, as I did last time, with a plug for our editorial and op-ed pages. If you feel strongly about this or other issues, write us a letter or write us a guest column and send it to insight orlandosentinel.com. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.